I had a problem with this fuel oil furnace stinking after the draft motor shut off. The injector nozzle is likely drizzling fuel out in the heat exchanger, so I'm going to do some maintenance and remove and replace it. Before you start working on this, turn off the electrical power to the furnace. There is 10,000 volts waiting in here to get turned loose on you if you didn't. And whatever screws is holding the transformer down, usually two of them up in front, that center screw stays put. Assuming you've got the electric off, this has 10,000 volts that goes across these to those electrodes, and I always just stick a little something in there just in case somebody turns the power on you, and that'll keep you from getting electrocuted. The first thing I want to do is get my wrench on this line. Be sure you use a backup wrench on this, or you end up loosening that pipe where it set screws at. But put a little pressure pulling back. That one seems loose too. I'll have to fix that. Pull back on your 9/16 just a little bit and push on the 7/16. If you don't want to deal with any fuel oil, especially if it's in a house or something, you shove a rag up underneath to catch any seepage from taking this loose. Be advised that these flare nuts can strip out, and this flare end can break off at any time. It's best to have a spare this size pipe laying around. Just kind of bend your pipe back a little tiny bit to give it room to deal with it. And take whatever's holding this down loose. I have to push it sideways from underneath this notch here into the line. Pull it up a little bit until you get it just kind of wedged in there. There's a CAD cell right here on the bottom. It's just slid into that slot right there. And just push back on it. Have a look and see if the eyes turn brown or got any problems, dirt on it. Want to clean that off with a rag or something. And look for problems like something's been eating or wearing it here. That'll get you a cold morning if it touches the metal anywhere. Just pull your burner assembly up out of there. I think that wiring is getting about had it on that CAD cell. It's pretty brittle. Well, this CAD cell will, this raised up circle will pull out of this plug-in. This little carbon feather where it was getting out of adjustment, or the injector's got a problem. Looks like it's been leaking fuel where it doesn't belong. Oh no, not too bad. I've been having a problem with it stinking. And it's probably because the injector's letting the residual pressure out. Let's see what that was interfering with. Once you get your burner assembly out, mount it in a vise. Be careful, it's aluminum. Look it over. Make sure it doesn't have any carbon build up on this air deflector. If there's feathers of black, then something's wrong. Either the electrodes aren't adjusted right, or the injector's dirty. If there's any black streaks coming off of those vanes. Just to look at the general condition of it, it's just went through a season and it needs replaced. I'm going to check the gap in the igniters. Should be an 1/8 inch on this one. It's typical in the older models. I just use an 1/8 inch drill bit, and if it either drags or makes contact through it, the gap's good yet. Pretty good. It's burning pretty clean. And first thing I want to do is take this screw loose, or nut, whatever you got holding it down, and get these electrodes out of the way. Sometimes these ribbons are shorter, sometimes they're longer. Clean any carbon off the porcelain on the tips of it. And the porcelain, just clean them off in general. Once the electrodes are out, take a brush and brush off any carbon around this nozzle. Toothbrush or whatever, and use some diesel fuel on it or carburetor cleaner or whatever. Just clean the particles up around it. Try not to disturb your air deflector. It doesn't survive too many of them before the screw's stripped out. Just like this deal here. This can be tapped and a piece of all thread put in it with a nut to solve that problem. Okay, I'm going to wash that off with some carburetor cleaner. Okay, loose debris has been removed and washed off from around the nozzle. I need to take a 3/4 inch wrench for a backup and a 5/8 wrench for the nozzle, and just slip it in underneath one of the deflector arms. Just make sure you don't see any carbon pieces or anything on that. I think that was a hollow cone. This furnace originally used a 0.65 gallon per hour with a 70-degree angle nozzle, and was designed for use in a house. I'm using it in a smaller garage, so I put a 0.50 gallon per hour with a 70-degree angle. And it'll be wrote on the side of the nozzle somewhere. Now I've took a black marker pen and wrote this on the side of the furnace so that I can keep track of it whenever I need to buy a replacement. And this is the replacement of the .50 70-degree angle. This angle is critical for the design of the heat exchanger and for it to even function borderline minimally. Now I'm going to wash this pipe out with some more brake or carburetor cleaner. Flush it out. I'm going to turn it upside down, back flush it the other way. Just as an added precaution, since I'm handling this robustly, I put a plastic cap over the supply line fitting. Keep dirt out of it. You do not want any dirt in this contaminating the new injector. I'll be installing an injector with it pointed down, minimize the risk of dirt falling into it. Shine a light down in there, make sure it's clean of buildup from the old diesel fuel. I'm going to take the cap off of this. Do not handle the cinder filter on the end of the nozzle or risk of contaminants. I'm going to put the red cap down, just lift the clear part off of it. And that's the cindered filter. I keep dirt off of that at all costs. If your finger is absolutely clean and stuff, you might check this cindered filter and make sure it's not loose by turning it or trying to turn it with your fingertips, but just don't fool with it as little as possible. Now that the nozzle's down, I can mount it back in the vise. This is down finger tight. Got my 3/4 inch wrench on there for backup and a 5/8 wrench to tighten the nozzle. That's pretty good. This just needs about an 1/8 inch turn past finger tight. You don't want to over tighten it and mess the threads up or distort this nozzle. But it should be down and then about an 1/8 inch past and it's done. Now to put the electrodes back in it. And take some 180 and clean that ring around those electrodes out. Some 180 sandpaper. If your electrodes are salvageable. Get them nice and clean. Just generally. Just knock the carbon off the places. You don't want to scratch them up too much. That slick coating helps them out. Glaze. But these will probably get replaced next season, so. Alrighty, these mount in there typically with a brass strip pointing up, not down. Shouldn't be able to see this nut. And this brass strip should be to a right angle from this electrode, because it'll sit just above the nozzle, just raised up a little bit. And this brass strip should be horizontal, flat to go through this support in the back if it's the type you have. stick the electrodes up in front of the nozzle a little bit, get them in a ballpark. When you put your plate back on, flip it over so it'll kind of bend back the other way if it's just a piece of square metal and no irregular shapes to it. Snug this screw just a little tiny bit so there's some restriction on these moving. You could sandpaper off this plastic support too if it gets carboned up bad enough. It might conduct electric instead of going across in front of the spray pattern. Now the worst part of the job, I'll make sure this air deflector center rib is supporting it is at 12 o'clock in line with this screw back here. To set the electrodes. And different furnaces require different gaps, anywhere from 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch that I know. And this one requires an 1/8 inch gap between these, which I use a drill bit for fast reference, an 1/8 inch drill bit, and 5/16 from this pinhole in the center of the nozzle to the center of those electrodes. Something fast. They make gauges and different things. I use a 5/16 wrench that's not wore out in there and gauge it from the pinhole to the center electrodes. That'll get you in a ballpark so you can get a more permanent situation ready. And that'll put your electrodes where they need to be good enough to work, especially if you're broke down. The pinhole should just be centered at the other end of the wrench. Just make sure it's square with the electrodes. That's the height they need to be from the center. Now the electrodes need to point at each other 1/16 of an inch past the nozzle. And a 1/16 of an inch is one of these longer lines. And that's an 1/8 inch, and there's a 1/16. The longer line. And there's an 1/8. That's double a 1/16. So you can either lay a 1/16 inch drill bit there or eye it, which I'm pretty good at, so I've done this many times. I'll just leave at least one where the 5/16 reference is at. I'll move the other one up a 1/16 past the nozzle, which is just enough to see behind the tip of it down the nozzle. I'll put it in line with the other one. This changes depending on what angle you're looking at. You keep your eye focused in the center of this pinhole and base the electrodes off the center of this pinhole. One 1/16 of an inch past. Now you don't want to get those electrodes too far ahead of that nozzle. Something to help you verify. You just take like this 1/8 inch drill bit and follow this air funnel down to that pinhole. And as long as the electrodes are an 1/8 inch away from the edge of the drill bit, from where it hits that air deflector to the center pinhole, you don't have to worry about fuel oil misting on it. At least 1/8 of an inch. And definitely not hitting this drill bit from the straight edge, because the air forces into a spiral pattern and the fuel sprays out of this no greater than to hit this reflector. It'll probably come out like this, but as it wears it can get sporadic and actually get up to this air reflector, and the air flowing past will keep it confined. But if your electrodes are out in it, the oil will stick to the electrodes and build up on it, short them out, and then you'll wake up to a cold house. But takes some practice. Now, if those electrodes are pointing at each other a 5/16 of an inch above this pinhole and 1/16 in front of it, slide our 1/8 inch drill bit and see if it makes contact with both electrodes with only a slight drag, more than a fraction of an inch. But as long as this below 3/16 of an inch and above an 1/8 inch, it'll survive till the season's over with any luck. But if there's a big gap where you're moving this 1/8 inch piece side to side, a quarter of its width farther than it's sticking in there fits it, then you'll need to get electrodes, or it can start carboning up and causing problems. But anyway, so these are 1/16 of an inch past them. They're a 5/16 above the pinhole, and they need to be straight across from each other. You can look at them sideways too. They should just look like they continue like a horseshoe, or a skinny horseshoe, from one right to the other. And now snug this screw down another half turn or quarter turn and check this business again. Make sure they're still in line, because they can move. And some of the finickier ones, you'll have to offset to account for how much it moves when it gets tightened down. Some of them are like that. But once that's established, and this screw's about as tight as you can get it without using a pair of pliers on a screwdriver or something. I've been tightening this support, this bridge underneath here, with my thumb and forefinger, not touching the electrodes. Put the screwdriver to it, support the bridge, then tighten your screw down. Don't disturb the electrodes. Offhand, take an 11/32 or 5/16 and just put a little pressure on these nuts back here to make sure they're both tight, and that these brass plates are flat and not pointing away from each other. That's the final shape of the electrodes. There. This piece of metal that I've made is 5/16 of an inch wide on the end. And from the center of the nozzle hole to the center of the electrodes is 5/16 of an inch. and to verify that they're straight across from one another. This 1/8 inch drill bit on this nozzle anyway just barely takes the tip of both sides. And the screws tightened down all the way. You got to keep checking this. First stage, snug the screw down so it offers some resistance while you're setting the electrodes. Second stage, tighten it down about half as much as you're going to put on it. And then check these and adjust accordingly. And then finally, tighten it down almost as tight as you can get it, but not enough to strip it. And check clearances again. And it should be in business. Electrodes are 1/16 of an inch past the nozzle. Yeah, I should have a good clean burn out of that. If you really wanted to verify this, if you don't have any rumbling or problems after lighting it up a couple of times, you're probably in business. But if it wasn't doing it before and all you did was change the electrodes, chances are you've got them out of alignment. They are a pain sometimes. On this assembly, I can't stress enough, the absolute cleanliness inside of this tube is critical, or you'll ruin the new nozzle. They're really not cleanable. It's not much success rate in taking it apart and cleaning it. So be sure and keep this end capped off after you clean the tube out. Looks like it's ready to go back in there.